Welcome to this evening's talk on the Ten Commandments. Most of us know that the Ten Commandments are the foundation of God's teaching on morality. Often when we think of morality or ethics, we think in terms of rules. But while the commandments are rules, they're commandments after all. The commandments are rules. We don't want to think of them only as rules. The teaching tradition of the church from the earliest centuries of the church, all the way through the Middle Ages, the way they taught the Ten Commandments were not as a bunch of rules to follow, thou shalt not, but as a way to grow in virtue. So the focus was on looking at the Ten Commandments and how do we grow in virtue, and that's how we're gonna look at it tonight. So even when we hear the word commandment, we want to do our best not to think in terms of rules, but to think of a loving Father sharing the wisdom and the tools to propel us forward to greater virtue. That's what we want to extract out of the Ten Commandments tonight. That's the goal, that's the vision of the evening. Now, to be clear, and I need to make this disclaimer just for the heck of it. There are some people, perhaps, that whenever there's a talk on morality or ethics or something like that, they think that the person up here talking thinks he's got it all together. That is not the case here tonight, okay? I'm not going to share with you which one of the Ten Commandments or which 2 or 3 of the Ten Commandments I still have a struggle with. I'm not going to share that tonight. But just rest assured, I don't have it all together. But I can read books and study the Bible and pass things out to you guys, what I think is kind of fun. I went through a book by Monsignor Charles Pope that's 100 pages long, and the Catechism, which has about 120 pages on the Ten Commandments, and Peter Kreif's book, a section of it has 80 pages. So I went through a whole bunch of different stuff. The Ten Commandments are actually an enormous subject. And I'll only have time to hit the basics and some things that I think are really interesting. But there's a lot more. So here's the overview for tonight. We're going to take a look at the Old Testament view of the Ten Commandments. Then we're going to take a look at the New Testament view of the Ten Commandments. Then we're going to look at what the modern world has to say. What's the present day view of the Ten Commandments? And lastly, we're actually going to do a walkthrough of the Ten Commandments. The walkthrough is the part of the talk where chances are there's going to be a few of you in the room that get upset with me, but I've got to say what's true. So hopefully that's why I said that last prayer. Please listen graciously. So the Ten Commandments come from the Old Testament, and they were delivered roughly 3,500 years ago. They can be found in both the book of Exodus and the book of Deuteronomy. They are originally given to Moses on Mount Sinai and brought down in the book of Exodus, but they're also repeated in the book of Deuteronomy as sort of a recap of what's going on. And this is why the Ten Commandments, and there's different numbering formats. I knew there was something up there that I didn't put down. And there's different numbering formats. If you're coming in from outside the Catholic Church, you're used to one numbering structure of the Ten Commandments, and as Catholics, we're used to a different numbering structure. I'm going to walk through exactly how that works, or why that is. Now, here is the Ten Commandments as it appears in Deuteronomy. Those of you in the back of the room, I know you can't read this unless you got really good eyes. It's not meant to be read. It's up for illustration purposes. But this is what we find. This part up here is basically the intro. God is saying, I am the Lord your God. That's what that section says. Then we get to, you shall have no other gods before me. Basically, don't worship other gods. This section here talks about don't have idols. This section, don't take the Lord's name in vain. This large section here all says, remember the Lord's day and keep it holy. Then we get to honor your father and mother, honor your parents. Then the ones that we know really well, you shall not kill, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, and you shall not lie. And then the last little section here, it's you shouldn't covet your neighbor's wife, and you shouldn't covet your neighbor's house, servants, or animals. Now that word covet is not a normal word that we use all the time. Covet means it's more than just admiration of something or liking something. It's a strong, unbridled attraction to something. It's an improper desire that can that can twist somebody's mind and lead them to try and obtain something improperly or in a sinful manner. Now, I put the list up there. Does anybody notice anything wrong with the list? Yeah, there you go. Somebody can count. There's more than 10 items up there, aren't there? Okay? And I just went from the text over there. There's more than 10 items up there, and I've actually already squished a couple of these things down. The first item that I mentioned, the first item, as I mentioned, I am the Lord your God, that's not actually a command, so we're going to skip that one, okay? So we start with the first command, which is don't worship other gods, and if we start numbering them, we find out we end up with a problem as we get to 11. That's a problem. So how do we resolve this? I could go into a lot of detail here, a lot of history. It was kind of fun researching all this, but I'm going to try and keep things simple and get us out of here on time. So basically what has to happen is we need to group two things together and make it one commandment, and then that resolves the problem. Now Catholics and most Protestants, not all, have two different things that they want to group together, hence the different numbering systems. Although we all accept that all the words on the page, we agree to all of the words on the page. Nobody's throwing anything out. But we number things differently. The way that most Protestants look at this is they look at these last two that start with don't covet. And they go, well, don't covet and don't covet. Well, that's one thing. So they reword this last part and say don't covet your neighbor's wife, house, servants, or animals. And they make one commandment out of these last two items. So 10 and 11 turn into 10 commandments. Solved. Problem solved. Okay? And that's one certainly acceptable way to do it. It includes everything that's over here, and that's one numbering system. So if you're coming in from out of the Catholic Church, that's the numbering system you're used to seeing. Now, how do Catholics do it? Catholics look at it the way that St. Augustine did in the 4th century. So he goes down there and he says, I can't combine these two. There's two very different things going on at the bottom here. Not coveting a neighbor's wife is vastly different than coveting a neighbor's house, servant, and animals. Coveting the neighbor's wife is lust. Coveting the neighbor's house, servants, and animals is greed, because that's effectively property. I'm sorry to throw servants in with property, but this was 3,500 years ago, so it is property at that point in time. So the items number 10 and 11 are lust and greed, two very different sins, two very different things that we should be concerned with. So St. Augustine didn't group those two together. Instead, he looked at the top, Catholic. Instead, he looked at these two. And he says, don't worship other gods. Don't have idols. Well, idols are false gods, which would be other gods. So he reckoned those two go together. And then, just for fun, he added the I am the Lord your God, which isn't a command, to the commandment, and he made all of that, he reworded it, I am the Lord your God, don't worship other gods, and don't have idols, basically. That becomes our commandment number 1. When you renumber everything, you end up with 10, problem solved. But in a different way, right? In a different way. And the renumbers the rest. I've been talking off the cuff. I haven't been looking at my notes. So, but again, it's important to recognize that either way you group it, it's the same number of items. All of these words are still there. So all of this ends up over there, no matter which numbering system you use. It's sort of like if you go to the grocery store and you buy 10 items, and when you finish the 10 items, you take 2 bags and you place different things in different bags. It really doesn't matter which bag you put it in as long as all 10 things get home, right? So that's basically what it is here. So don't worry about the fact that it's a different numbering system. However, for the rest of the evening, we will talk about the Catholic numbering system. For those of you in the room who are used to the Lutheran numbering system, it's slightly different. That's why I kept saying most Protestants. Because for Lutherans, they take those last two, 9 and 10, and they actually, instead of breaking out the neighbor's wife as something separate, they break out the neighbor's house as something separate. And number 10 ends up being don't covet the neighbor's wife, servant, and animals. The rationale behind that is that the house is an inanimate object. The house and the land are inanimate objects, and the wife, servant, and animals are living creatures. So that's the reasoning why that was separated that way. But we're not going to do that way. We're going to look at the Catholic numbering system. So we're going to take a look at this, the Catholic numbering system. Now, the first 3 are all about God, our relationship with God, and the rest are about our relationship with neighbor. If you were looking at the way that most Protestants number things, that would be the first 4 are for God, and the last are for other people. So, a couple of last comments about the Old Testament, and then we'll move on. Several weeks ago, like week number 4 of OCIA, we talked about creation and the fall, and God's creation of the natural order. So, when he created everything, he was creating the natural order. Now with the 10 Commandments, this creates the moral order. And so both of them are God creating order out of chaos. First, he orders the physical world back in creation, and now he's ordering the spiritual world. So it's interesting that we're seeing 2 different types of creation going on here. In addition to this, the 10 Commandments, we're all pretty much familiar, right? Moses goes up the mountain and speaks with God with tablets in his hand, and then he comes down with the tablets etched. He didn't go up there with a chisel. The Bible says that the 10 Commandments were written by the finger of God. It's important to remember. They were written by the finger of God. But there were also other laws in the Old Testament which were Mosaic laws. They were written by Moses. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff there. And that's because some of the 10 Commandments are basically external laws, and Moses had to fill in the gaps between the external laws. So I'll give you an analogy. Let's say I've got a problem with Daniel, and let's say, sorry, we're going to hug afterward just to get this done with. But let's say, thou shalt not kill. Let's say I wanted to violate that, and I wanted to kill you. Well, the 10 Commandments say I can't do that. So basically, the 10 Commandments have an external law. Whoops. And put a traffic cone between you and me. I can't do that, right? But there's nothing in the 10 Commandments that says, I can't hire Josh to kill you. It's technically not in the 10 Commandments. That's a way around it, right? I wish you ill. I don't. I love you. But I wish you ill, so I'm going to hire Josh to do that. So Moses had to write an extra law that says, you're not allowed to hire somebody to kill somebody. And what he did was he created a law. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 27, verse 25. It says, you are not allowed to take a bribe to kill somebody else. It actually doesn't say that I'm not allowed to offer you the bribe, but it says that you're not allowed to take the bribe. Okay? So that's Moses' way to fill in the gaps on these external laws, because if you want to play word games, you can get around them, right? This is the problem with an external law. You can play word games. Anybody familiar with people playing word games? Ever heard that before? Yeah, it happened. Nothing new under the sun. So, and again, it's not hypothetical. Look it up. Deuteronomy 27:25. It literally says you're not allowed to take a bribe to kill somebody. So figuring this out. So people have gone through this for like 3,500 years. But in addition to those laws, the Mosaic laws include things like social laws, food laws, purity laws, feasts, sacrifices, offerings, all that kind of stuff. The 10 Commandments, remember, come directly from the finger of God, and the 613 other laws come from Moses. 613 laws. Unbelievable. And people were expected to memorize all of them and abide by all of them. Amazing. So, we'll leave the traffic cones there. They're kind of fun. So, we move on to the New Testament. What did Jesus have to say about the 10 Commandments? Well, he said very specifically, he did not come to abolish the commandments. But Paul tells us in his letters that Christ did free us from the other laws, the Mosaic laws. So, the 10 Commandments that were written by the finger of God, those don't get erased, finger of God. But the laws that were written by a man, they can be erased. And so how did Jesus update and improve upon these 10 Commandments and 613 other laws? How did he do that? Well, he did that by creating 2 new commandments. Anybody know what they are? What are the 2 big commandments that Jesus teaches us? Love God, love your neighbor, right? So love God, love your neighbor. All of those, all 10 commandments, all 613 other laws are improved upon by just those 2, which is incredible. Now, if you know your Bible well, you can say, well, back in the Old Testament, it said, love your neighbor. It says it, I can't remember if it's Leviticus or Deuteronomy right now, I don't remember. But it did say it back in the Old Testament, love your neighbor. That was in the Old Testament. That's true. But how do the ancient Israelites define neighbor? That's the question. In Leviticus 19, no, and I remember it says, in Leviticus 19, it implies that neighbor only means kinsman, those of the same tribe, those that are countrymen, those that are the literal neighbor of you. And clearly this is how the ancient Israelites understood it, because Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, he says, you have heard it said that you love your neighbor and hate your enemies, which is different than what we understand, right? Because we've been taught everyone is your neighbor, right? So now Jesus clarifies that neighbor means everyone, not just your literal neighbor, not just your kinsman, not just your countryman. He sums up hundreds of external laws with two internal laws. That's how powerful these things are, because you can't get around it with wordplay. See, that cone right there, I can figure out a way to get around it because I still want to go after Daniel. Sorry, I'm just going to use you as an example. I want to get around it so I can play with that. But if it's an internal law and it's love, I can't even get out of my own chest and move towards him because love is internal. It's amazing how all of that can be reduced to love God, love your neighbor. It's absolutely beautiful. So he makes the moral code both easier and harder at the same time. It's far easier to remember, love God, love your neighbor, instead of 613 laws. Forget trying to memorize the 10 commandments. You got to remember 613 other ones. So he makes it easier by making it easier to remember, but much harder to live up to because you can't get around things. You just have to love, which is beautiful. The very fact that Jesus could replace the 10 commandments or upgrade them with just love God and love your neighbor shows how the 10 commandments are completely grounded in love. Now remember, we talked about different types of love, and we're not talking about the emotional types of love. We're talking about the God-centered love, the agape love, willing the good of the other person, wanting the best for someone else. That's the divine love we're talking about. So Jesus explicitly tells us that he wants us to expand the 10 commandments from the letter of the law to the spirit of the law. He says, you have heard it said that you shall not kill. But I say, don't even be angry. I'm not supposed to kill. I'm sorry. You're never going to want to come back. I'm supposed to not want to kill Daniel, but I'm supposed to not even want to be angry with him. I didn't quite word that correctly, but you know what I'm talking about. We're supposed to expand those 10 commandments in the direction of love. So we learn from Jesus that the 10 commandments are a starting point that we then expand in the direction of love. So, moving on to the present day. How does the modern world view the 10 commandments? Any snarky answers to that one? What does the modern world think? What does modern culture think about the 10 commandments? They revere it? Optional? Okay, optional. Disregard? Obsolete? There's all sorts of things. Father John Riccardo, and this was years and years ago. He said like 10 years or more ago. He says he was watching one of the cable. This tells you how long ago it was. The cable movie channels, and there was an ad. I never saw it, but there was an ad on one of the cable movie channels that said, and the ad basically, where the ad explicitly said, watch ours on Sunday night because we're guaranteed to break at least 20% more of the commandments than other channels. It's a punchline to much of the modern world. Not to the people in this room, but to much of the modern world. And they try and ram it down our throat, which is actually not very good. So I think if we looked at the present day, we can all agree that modern culture is actively hostile towards morality. Doesn't include all of us, doesn't include a lot of the people we know, but the modern culture is really antagonistic towards any kind of moral discipline whatsoever, which therefore includes the 10 commandments. But our mindset and our goal is eternal. So we really don't care what the modern world has to say about it. We want to grow in virtue and we want to follow God. So that's our preference to do. One last thing before we start going through the list of 10 commandments. 8 of the commandments have some form of no in it. Thou shalt not. Some sort of negative connotation to it. which sounds bad because we're trying to move forward in virtue, and we're talking about staying away from things. So, because we want to focus on building virtue, so we're going to add a new way to think about each one. So we want to also think about the commandment as not just thou shalt not do something bad, but do something good. We want to flip it in our mind. For an example, one of the commandments is thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not lie. Well, we can reword that and say, be truthful, right? It's the same concept, right? You'd agree it's the same concept, but it leads us in a good direction as opposed to focusing on the negative. It focuses towards the good. Think of this picture here, okay? So you got a red door and a green door. We're not supposed to go through the red door. And the thou shalt nots are all the wood up against the red door saying, don't go through that one, which implies that we're supposed to go through the green one. And on this picture, it's real easy to see where the green door is because there's nothing else in the picture. But if it was crowded, we might not know where to go. So tonight, what we're going to do is put a big arrow over the green door and say, this is where we want to go. That's conceptually what we're going to be doing when we look at the Ten Commandments tonight. So, so instead of looking at the Ten Commandments as holding us back from sin, which is what they do, we're going to think of them as pulling us forward towards virtue. So as we go through the Ten Commandments, remember, Jesus didn't abolish them. They're not out of the Bible. We're just going to add a new wording to think about them in an additional way. But we're not removing what's in the Bible at all. And all of the Ten Commandments come down to love God, love your neighbor. If we bring the Ten Commandments back up, right? This is love God, this is love your neighbor. So as we go through, as we expand the Ten Commandments in the direction of love, we're also going to be learning about love God, love your neighbor. We're going to start filling that in. What I'm really fond of is opening up a really simple concept, filling in the details, and then closing it back up. And now when we think love God, we know about that more. There's just more detail to it. There's more texture to that concept. Same thing with love neighbor. So we're going to use the Ten Commandments to build virtue, but also to deepen our understanding of that word love in the agape sense. Okay, time for the commandments. Enough foreshadowing. Now we get into the actual walkthrough. First commandment: I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. Rather positive, but there is that word "no" in there. So we'll offer an additional wording. We can look at this with that arrow that points to the green door, right? Only worship the one true God. Same concept. Only worship the one true God. Now, this goes back to the Nicene Creed. If you remember the Nicene Creed talk, we talked about that first line of the Creed, which is Credo et unum Deum. I believe in one God. And we believe in that because it's the objective reality of the situation. It's not because it happens to match our personality. It's that we recognize this is the actual objective reality. There is one true God. We have found that truth. We proclaim that truth. We entrust ourselves to that truth. And as such, we reject idols. But do we know what an idol is? In the Old Testament times, a lot of people worship different gods. Certainly the people around the Israelites worship different gods, and they were warned by God not to do that, which is part of why this is part of this. And a lot of people had carved idols around the house. They'd carve it out of wood, and they'd have different gods around the house, and they pray to these different gods, which is obviously not what we're supposed to do. And it's just where we hear in the Bible say this, and it was in that little text that was up there, it says, you shall not make for yourself a graven image, a carved image. You shall not make for yourself a graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. In other words, an idol. God can't mean you're not allowed to carve anything out of wood that looks like something. He can't mean you can't make any likeness of anything that's in heaven or earth, because God explicitly commands Moses, after he gives him the Ten Commandments, to go make a brazen serpent. He explicitly tells Moses that you need to have 2 carved cherubim, heaven, in the tabernacle, in that area. So he can't mean you're not allowed to carve images. Can't mean that. So, but note that God never tells Moses that you're supposed to bow down and worship these things that I just told you to make. That's where the idol part comes in. We're not supposed to serve them. We're not supposed to bow down to them. They're not idols. Now, some people think that Catholics worship idols, worship images, worship statues, and that's not true. No Catholic that knows their faith well anyway, no Catholic worships an image or a statue. Worship is reserved for God alone, period. The worship that is reserved for whatever that image points to. So if we're standing in front of a statue of Jesus, that may help us to focus our mind so that we can worship Jesus, but we're not focused on that statue. Same thing about statues of saints, and that's not worship, but we look at the saint, that might remind us that we venerate, we honor those saints. We honor the work that God has done through those saints that inspire us, but not the statue. We're very clear on that. Think about this. Think about your house right now, and probably, I would imagine most of you have pictures of your loved ones up on the wall, right? You got, this birthday thing and this vacation and this, and there's pictures of people that you love up on the walls. And you go, well, that's great. They're not idols. They remind you of someone you love. You're looking past that image to whatever that image represents. So it's the love of the actual person, not the image itself. So in the modern day, no Christian, not Catholic, not non-Catholic, no Christian worships an idol. Or do they? An idol doesn't have to be a god. An idol is anything that stands between you and God and obscures your view of God. An idol causes confusion. It pulls you away from God because the idol comes first. That's the key about an idol. The idol comes first. Things like greed, things like lust, can cause us to do things that we know that God doesn't want us to do. But we do them because we value that thing over what God is telling us. And so some of these things are like greed and lust, they're bad things. But even something good, like, for instance, like your job, can become an idol. We're supposed to have God first. But what if you rank your job above God, and then your job asks you to do something immoral? Well, God's down here, so your job wins, and you might do something immoral. So your job has crowded out what God is telling you to do. So your job, in a good thing, can become an idol if you're not careful. God always got to come first. That's like the definition of an idol. An idol is anything that causes us to push God aside and make a decision contrary to what we know that God wants us to do, if God were first in our lives. Idols do exist. They're just not carved out of wood anymore. They're more subtle than that. Bishop Barron says an interesting line. He says, when there's clarity about what we worship, then the rest of our life falls into order. When there's clarity about what we worship, do we worship God or do we worship our job? Do we worship God or do we worship lust? Do we worship God or do we worship greed? Which is it? If there's clarity about what we worship, the rest of our life falls into order. It's great. So how do we expand this in love? Well, we focus on genuine, faithful worship of God and we keep our priorities straight. That's how we do it. On to commandment number 2. Commandment number 2 is, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. So thou shalt not. So let's try and word it in a positive way so we can think about it in 2 different ways. If we word it differently, we could say, respect the sacred name of God. The sacred name of God. Now, I can't remember which talk it was, but I talked about the difference between sacred and profane. Does everybody remember that? Does everybody remember the definition of sacred and profane? I'll repeat it for you just in case you don't remember. Sacred, sacred we sort of know. That's, to hold something, it's holy, it's set apart, etc. Profane is one of my, for some reason it's like a favorite word of mine because it's like cool the way it breaks up. Profane comes from Latin, profanum. Pro, meaning in front of or outside, fanum, temple. So something that is profane is something that's outside the temple. So, and it's very close to the word vain, actually. It has the same kind of thing, which means sort of empty or useless. So we're not supposed to use the Lord's God in an outside the sacred manner or an empty manner. and the reason this happens so much in this world is so many people have lost the sense of what is holy. So many people have lost the sense of what is sacred. But it's not so with Catholics. Look at our liturgy. Look at the Mass. Look at our liturgy. Sacred. Look at our buildings. There's parts of our buildings that are sacred. Catholics haven't lost the sense of the sacred. So this should be an easy one to do. And we take our sacred, we take that sacredness directly from the mouth of God. Just after the Ten Commandments, God calls Moses back up the mountain, and then he painstakingly describes to Moses how he wants the sacred liturgy to be conducted, how the tabernacle, how the building is supposed to be constructed, how the priests are supposed to be consecrated and ordained, how the priests are supposed to be dressed, how the vestments they're supposed to wear, the special things. This is in Exodus 25 through 31, so 7 chapters, 7 full chapters. God is describing to Moses how he wants that sacred liturgy to be conducted. And then the construction of those things is detailed. It gives us more info in Exodus 35 through 40. Throw another 6 chapters at the end of Exodus. That's 13 chapters that God is describing to us how he wants to be worshipped. It's not supposed to be willy-nilly. It's not supposed to be, light show, big band, whatever makes you dance and clap your hands. That's not the case. That's praise. That's wonderful. But it's not sacred liturgy. It's not sacred. So similarly, God's name should be considered sacred as well. It shouldn't be used as an expletive, for instance. That's not good. Or the subject of a non-important oath. Like, I swear to God, that's not good. Now, if you're in court and you have to give an oath and you swear an oath on the Bible, well, that's an important oath. So swearing to God in that sense is okay. But not something unimportant. Again, empty, vain. I swear to God I was there. No. That's not good. By the way, I always think about this one. Have you ever been hammering a nail and you're holding the nail with your fingers and you're hammering it in and you slip and you hit your thumb? What's the first word that comes out of your mouth? Okay, some people are saying it under their breath. There's 2 lists that it comes off of. Either one of the 4-letter words or the name of God. How does that work? Of the tens of thousands of words that are in your head, you've got milliseconds for your brain to pick a word to yell out when you hit your thumb, and you either pick one of the 4-letter words or Jesus. Why? It's an interesting question. I don't have an answer for it, other than the fact that we've been programmed to take the Lord's name in vain, and we should try and reverse that. Now, you try and reverse that. What I just described is a reflexive thing. You can't stop yourself in a matter of a few milliseconds. This weekend, when you hit your thumb, and you happen to shout, Jesus! Don't say, Lord, I'm sorry, and move on. You can't be held accountable for that. That was not something that you did intentionally. But it's just an interesting concept. Why in the world, out of all the words we know, are those the words that we come to at that moment? It's interesting. So this is a way to say it in an empty manner. We also don't want to use the Lord's name as a curse. And frankly, we don't have the power to tell God to damn anything. So it's useless anyway. So we shouldn't do that. There's also, you remember, getting around things with fancy wordplay. Some people love to use what are called evasive synonyms. Evasive synonyms are like, gosh darn it. Everybody in the room knows exactly what you meant to say. You're just being evasive. But it's the same thing. You've just taken the Lord's name in vain. So don't do that. Just simply changing a few letters doesn't change it. And some of you, maybe from the Midwest know, cheese and crackers. Evasive, everybody knows what you meant to say, especially if they're from the Midwest. So don't do that either. Anyway, so how do we expand this in love? Okay, getting off the funny stuff. How do we expand this in love? Instead of being profane and empty with our speech and like much of the current world, we want to treat God's name with respect. We want to treat each other's name with respect. We want to treat language itself with respect. That's what we want to do. So that's number 2. Number 3, remember the Lord's Day and keep it holy. That's positive, so we're going to have to come up with a new wording for that. Now, some people think that this means remember the Lord's Day and keep it holy. Well, we give up an hour, we go to Mass. Wrong. It doesn't say give up an hour on the Lord's Day and keep it holy. It says give up the Lord's Day and keep it holy. We're supposed to spend time together as the body of Christ and worship the Lord. But in your catechism paragraph 2172 says, and it's a great line. Lucy loves this line. The catechism says that on Sunday we are supposed to protest against the servitude of work and the worship of money. That's what we're supposed to do on Monday. On Sunday, excuse me. Monday, calling it sick. Sorry, boss. I'm protesting against the servitude of work. And I don't need a check this week either. Sorry, no. On Sunday, it's always a day of celebration. It's like a mini Easter every Sunday. So we protest against the servitude in work and the worship of money. Every Sunday is meant to remind us of what it's going to be like when we're with God in heaven. And we're not going to be working and we're not going to be chasing the almighty dollar in heaven. So we shouldn't do it on Sunday. That's what it means. Now, I know that some of you have jobs where you have to work on Sunday. I understand that. Priests, for instance, work on Sundays. Well, then you take another day and you make that the holy day because your job simply, and God will understand that. But you're supposed to take a day and say, I want a foretaste of heaven. I want to know what it's like to give this up and to be with you. Now, we're about 3 weeks before Lent starts. We talked about the liturgical seasons, I think last week. Week before last week. And Lent comes up, and the 40 days before Good Friday and Easter. And this is a penitential period of time. This is a time of introspection. It's a time where we think about what is it that Jesus said we should be like, and then we try and conform ourselves more like that during these 40 days. Sometimes, we can go hog wild, or we can just take one small sliver of our personality and say, that's out of line with what God wants, what Jesus wants for my life. I'm going to focus on this for 40 days and get a little bit better this year on that. That's what Lent is designed to do. And sometimes we give up something for Lent. We deprive ourselves of something that we like, sweets or cookies or something like that. I think I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but in the Q&A session, I didn't do it during a talk, so I'll remind you now. So maybe we deprive ourselves of chocolate or sweets or bacon or something like that, and we say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give that up, sort of to focus on that, but not on Sundays. If you give up sweets or chocolates, not on Sundays, because Sundays are always meant to be a mini celebration, and we don't deprive ourselves on mini celebrations. So remember that in Lent, when you've given up something on Sunday in the afternoon when you're having your chocolate, remember that I told you that you're allowed to have chocolate on Sundays during Lent. Anyway, so how do we expand this in love? Well, we connect with God every day, not just on Sundays, and we be grateful for every day. We be grateful for the gifts that he gives us. In the midst of all the chaos that we go through, we be grateful for the things that he gives us. And perhaps we can make someone else's day a little bit more like heaven on any given day. So that's how we can expand that in love. Number four is honor your father and your mother. Honor your parents. And this also is worded positively, so we're going to have to come up with a different wording. Honor your parents. Now, children have obviously a responsibility to show respect and gratitude and obedience to their parents. But there are no kids in the room. So I don't need to talk to the kids about respecting the parents. I'm going to flip this on its head, because the command to honor your parents sort of creates a complementary commandment. It's a responsibility to parents that the parents should strive to be worthy of that respect and gratitude and obedience. Otherwise, it's empty respect. And you don't want to teach your kids that. So you want to strive to be worthy of that. Now, no parent or child is perfect. No situation is perfect. I come from a divorced family, and I won't get into the details, but I didn't come from a perfect family. You work with what you've got, but you strive to be the best in whatever situation you're in. But But as much as possible, parents should provide and protect their children. They should be a good example. They should be the primary moral educators and spiritual examples for their kids. They have the privilege and the responsibility of evangelizing their kids. They should exercise a proper amount of discipline to keep the kids in line, but also understand that they're human persons too. So there's a respect there as well. Why? Because if the parent falls short, then to some extent there's a lack of foundation for that respect, which messes with people's heads. Again, there's imperfect situations, but we should strive to be the best we can. How do we expand this in love? Well, we extend honors. We extend honor not just to our parents, but to everyone. We extend that honor everywhere, regardless of a family bond, when it's appropriate. Sometimes it's not appropriate. We recognize that the family is the prototype for authority in the world. The family is where it starts. So we can expand that out into different dynamics. An employer-employee relationship, similar kind of thing. So provided your employer is doing the right thing, you should extend honor to your employer. If you're an employer, you should be trying to be worthy of that respect. Police, citizen, law enforcement, things like that. We should honor others and strive to be worthy of honor ourselves. Next one. Fifth commandment. Fourth commandment. Fifth commandment. You shall not kill. We step on the first live landmine of the night. There's two. So, you shall not kill. That's a shall not. Let's reword this in a positive way. We can say, respect life. Now first, to clarify, the original Hebrew underneath the phrase thou shalt not kill is actually thou shalt not murder. You shall not kill, you shall not in a premeditated fashion murder an innocent person. So it's a little different than thou shalt not kill as a blanket statement. There are justifiable times where it's appropriate to take a life. If someone breaks into your house and you're there to protect your family, well, now you've got one person who's not innocent and a couple of people behind me who are innocent, and I go back to respect life. I respect their life, and I don't want any of you to be in that situation. But there are times when it's justifiable. This commandment sets the stage, by the way, for the Catholic position on capital punishment. For hundreds of years, capital punishment was discouraged, but allowed if there was no other way to protect society from that guy. Consider, okay, well, we can put him in jail, but he can break out, right? And there's some people, there's a drug kingpin, I can't remember his name, and if anybody remembers, please don't shout it out. But there was a drug kingpin in somewhere where every time they put him away, his buddies who knew this guy was a billionaire, was going to give him millions of dollars if they could break him out, they'd start a mile away from the prison, they'd dig a tunnel underneath, come right up underneath his cell, and he'd break out. How do you protect society from somebody who literally can't be held? So in those cases, the Catholic Church would say, okay, to protect society, maybe it is acceptable. In 2018, 8 years ago, the Pope declared that death penalty is unacceptable in all circumstances. But he didn't make that declaration ex cathedra. If you remember the talk on papal infallibility, right? Infallibility means this is an absolute true statement. He did not make that statement ex cathedra. He made it as an earnest teaching, but not ex cathedra. So it's not a guarantee. And it's in the catechism, the catechism of the Catholic Church. In the catechism of the Catholic Church, I looked something up. I think you had asked me the question. Somebody asked me the question. You might have asked me a different question. I can't remember. But you're the one that's not allowed to kill him if I bribe you. So the cones are still up. So anyway, the Catechism of the Catholic Church it reliably transmits the faith, but there's no guarantee. No, it was Kevin. It was you. You asked me this question. Now I'm remembering as I'm saying it. Sorry. Not everything in the Catechism is considered to be infallible. It's considered to be a reliable transmission of the faith. But there's only certain sections of the Catechism that are considered to be absolute dogmatic facts. Other things are like this one about the death penalty is still in vigorous debate because it challenges a long-standing teaching that it was highly discouraged, but still accepted in certain situations. But it's not infallible teaching in there. So anyway, so how do we expand this in love? Well, first of all, we can think about something that only hurts someone and doesn't kill them. Going back to Daniel. Well, 10 Commandments say I'm not allowed to kill you, but Jesus expands that and says, I'm not even supposed to think about breaking your arm, provided, you'd let me do that. You'd beat the heck out of me if I tried. But I'm not supposed to even wish you any harm. I'm supposed to expand that commandment in love. So whether physically or emotionally, you're not supposed to hurt somebody. So it expands that. Now, there's more to say about this commandment. And before I go on, I need to say, I don't know the personal history of everybody in the room. So I need to state one thing extremely clearly before I move on. We're going to touch on some sensitive subjects for the next couple of minutes. And it's very important to understand that there are some times in our life where we've done something early in our life that we'd never do today. But we did it back then. We'd never do it today. We've grown. We understand more. We'd never do it again today. We grow throughout our lives. If a person is repentant of their sins, they can go to God and God will forgive you of anything that you have done in your life. Keep that in the back of your mind as I go through the next couple of minutes, because I might touch on something that has hit you. So, back to how do we expand this in love? Thou shalt not kill or respect life. Well, we recognize that all life is sacred, from the moment of conception to natural death. Even our own life is not our own to throw away. Today's culture would like us to believe that, euthanasia is acceptable. Physician-assisted suicide, that's just another option. Abortion, that's healthcare. That's an absolute human right to be able to abort my baby. They're all lies. These situations are incredibly personal, and I haven't had to face any of those, so I don't know what you might have gone through in the earlier life. But it doesn't change the fact that today's culture is working overtime to deceive us with very, very clever emotional arguments. And it's trying to get us to take an innocent life, sometimes our own. Live in Canada, get depressed, go to a doctor. They start offering you, do you want us to end your life? It's not good. In the Catechism, paragraph 2258, the Catechism says, human life is sacred, and no one, under any circumstance, can claim for himself the right to destroy an innocent human being. We need to respect life, even our own. St. Paul says to us that you are not your own. You were bought with a price. Christ went to the cross for you. Now, I've never been challenged with some of the things that some of you may have gone through, but it doesn't change the fact that while emotions play a part in situations like this, they shouldn't play the only part. We need to rely on our faith, we need to trust in God, and we need to trust in God's truth, that He tells us about these things because these things are bad for us. In order to convince us, this is back to the modern world, in order to convince us that life is cheap, one of the lies the world tells us is that suffering is useless. Is that true? Is suffering useless? What about the cross of Christ? Was that suffering useless? Redeemed the whole world. And this is where the church's teaching on redemptive suffering comes in. It's a beautiful concept. Absolutely beautiful concept. Redemptive suffering. Pope St. John Paul II tells us that Jesus redeems the entire world through his suffering. It's perfect. But God, because he wants to share everything with us, he leaves a little sliver of that redemption open that we can actually play a part in the redemption of the world. We can offer up our suffering and unite it to the cross and say, Jesus, take this suffering that I'm going through, this pain, this recovery from an illness, this overtime work, whatever it is that you're going through. So take this and I offer this to you. Help my kids out with this. Help my nephew, help my niece, help my friends. Help this person that's going through things. Take my suffering and just use it. God gives us the dignity to participate in that. St. Paul says, I make up in my flesh what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. And there's nothing lacking in the sufferings of Christ. It's just that God loves us so much that he wants to allow us to participate in that. So he opens that up, that if we're mindful of something when we're going through that pain, when we're going through that suffering, we can unite it to the cross and help someone else. So don't let that go. And we can do that at any time when we're going through stuff, recovering from an illness or whatever, or even on our deathbed. I don't wish this on any of you, but some of us at some point will be on our deathbed. And we will know that from this point forward, we're never going to get up out of this bed anymore. We're just not active members of society anymore. We are just sitting here waiting. But we can be active Christians in the deathbed by taking our suffering and uniting it to the cross and saying, use this. Use this. So remember to offer it up. It works when you take that suffering and you mindfully unite it to the cross. So when we know and we remember that every single human being is precious, we grow in virtue. Next. We're going to go to the 6th and 9th commandments because they sort of go together because you can read them. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. Kind of related, aren't they? One's the actual act, one's thinking about it. So they go together. The positive way to look at this, because this is thou shalt nots, right, is control your passions. Very simple. Now, technically, adultery is sex between a married person and any person that is not their spouse. I shouldn't have to define that, but just in case anybody didn't know, that's what it is. I'm trying to lighten the mood in the room because I really got dark a couple of minutes ago. I'm sorry. Relax, Greg. Okay. So now Jesus expands this in Matthew chapter 5. He says, you have heard it said that thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Matthew chapter 5. It's part of the Sermon on the Mount. This is why we can combine the 6th and the 9th commandments, because they're related. Jesus is telling us that. Because thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. So C9, commandment number 9, is an internal version of the external commandment number 6. Now, one clarification. I got to clarify this. A fleeting thought or recognizing that someone is attractive is not breaking this commandment. We are allowed to have fleeting thoughts. We can't stop it. We are allowed to recognize somebody that we consider to be attractive. That's not a problem either. That doesn't violate the commandment. It's only when it becomes a willful situation. Father John Ricardo tells a story. He talks about another priest friend of his, tells him this. He doesn't name the priest, which is a good thing. And he says, his priest friend deals with this in this way. He sees an attractive woman or somebody he finds attractive walking by. He goes, in his head, he doesn't say it out loud. He says, hello, pretty lady. And then he keeps walking. He doesn't stop and turn around and watch. That would be breaking the commandment. Recognizing it and moving on is okay. We're allowed to recognize beauty. God gave us beauty. So that's fine. It's moving into this territory where it's bad. Now, Peter Kraft, who wrote one of the books that I pull stuff out of for this talk, great writer, great thinker. Peter Kraft says that by its own admission, our modern culture thinks that the most unacceptable part of the church is its teachings on sexual morality. Why is that? Well, some people would say that the church is obsessed with sex. That's wrong. It's actually the world that is obsessed with sex. The church is obsessed with communicating the unchanging word of God, which is for our benefit. And the truth never changes, so the word can't change. The world desperately wants the church to get out of the way, and we simply won't. We have to stay true to God's word. Almost every controversial issue of today has to do with sexual morality. Sex outside marriage, contraception, homosexuality, pornography, divorce, and, again, abortion. Why abortion? Because some people demand access to abortion because it's a backup form of birth control. If the primary method didn't work, I want to have sex and I don't want to deal with the babies. But it's not just those outside the church who take issue with the church's teaching. A lot of people inside the church struggle with understanding the teachings related to sexuality. Why? This one's really important, guys. Because the world tries to make us think that these issues are political, and they're not. They're moral. They're moral. And when it's moral, only one person has a vote, and that's God. Think back to the creation and the fall. When Eve took the apple and Adam took of the apple, that was 2 votes to 1. Adam and Eve could outvote God. But in a moral situation, it was still wrong because there's only one vote when it comes to moral issues. And this is why the modern world wants us to say, oh, it's a political issue. Because it's a political issue, we can throw enough money at it and we get 51% of the vote and it's okay. But it's not okay. Because God says it's not okay and there's only one vote. So be very, very careful when somebody tells you something, well, that's a political issue. You can't bring God into it. That's a trick to try and make you leave God at the doorstep. God's not supposed to be underneath politics. God is above politics. God's above your job. God's above greed. God's above lust. God's above everything. And when somebody says, no, it's political, they're trying to say politics is your God, or politics is their God. Don't fall for the trap. God's still there. God only has the one and only vote on a moral issue. Now, there are genuine political issues, but not the moral ones. The moral ones, God's got the only vote. It's very important for us to recognize when our enemy is trying to reframe a moral issue as a political one. It's a trick to make you leave God at the doorstep. Our enemy tries to have you voluntarily make a decision against God, and it's a trick, which brings up another issue. In Old Testament times and in New Testament times, or in the present day, man has never been very good at keeping the commandments. It's just the way it is. But up until recently, the world accepted that the 10 Commandments were a good ideal to shoot for. Not so today. It's a punchline. Go back to that movie channel thing. You know, I don't know if it was a movie channel or what channel it was, but you know they're making fun of it now. Now modern culture wants to poke fun at it. We don't want to because the commandments are given to us by a loving Father who wants the best for us. These are the things that will make your life the best. And we trust him because we don't understand the spiritual word very well, but he does. He says these things will make your life better. Doesn't change the fact that what God is warning us about is bad for us. So today's culture doesn't even pretend that it's God's ideal. It's all-out war on God's plan. Many people are eager to rip certain sections out of the Bible. Oh, I'm just going to rip this out. That doesn't exist anymore. Or this passage, or even just these couple of words I'm going to take and throw out of the Bible. But there's a problem with that. Because maybe you are like me, admitting something here, that when I first came to faith, there were certain things that I read about that I objectively understood were true, but my heart wasn't in it yet. And I look at those and I'm not quite there yet. But I left the pages in the Bible because that's what was pulling me towards God. If I had voluntarily ripped them out, what's going to pull me towards God? If we take out all the pages of the Bible that don't agree with us, then we don't learn anything from the Bible. We don't learn anything from God's word if we rip everything out that's not already part of us. So we don't do that. Anyway, God has a plan for sex. And God knows that certain deviations from that plan are harmful for us. So he warns us about those. And the church passes along those warnings. We shouldn't accept the world to accept these teachings because the world didn't come up with these teachings. And the world doesn't like these teachings. If you struggle with any of these things, and what I just talked about and what I'm talking about here, if you struggle with these things, go to the catechism or find a good teacher. One of the best teachers, great young priest, Father Mike Schmitz. On YouTube. Go to Ascension Presents. I'll put it in the email that I send out for the link for this talk. It's on Ascension Presents. Father Mike Schmitz. He's got these little 5, 6, 7, 8 minute talks on various subjects that are sometimes really, really difficult, and he just says it with such clarity, such truth, such love. It helps you through certain things. So you just sort of like look through them. Oh, well, that one applies to me. Let me. Oh, wow, never thought about it that way. It's beautiful. Find yourself a good teacher in that sense. So sometimes we just need to be humble enough to listen to God because humility is a virtue and so is chastity, which is another way to put that. Now, so it takes care of thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not covet. The landmines are gone for the night, so we can all now breathe a sigh of relief. Greg can relax and get back into stuff. So now, 6th and 9th, we now go to the 7th and 10th, because these also go together. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not covet your neighbor's goods. Obviously, that's the internal version of the external there. Those are both negative, so let's say it in a positive way. Saying it positively, respect other people's property. Pretty simple. And it's a pretty simple thing to understand. None of us really need to think about this too much, but I will expand it a little bit. First, there's the literal meaning of stealing money or property from somebody. But if we expand this in love, we can also see that stealing might be stealing somebody's reputation, stealing somebody's opportunity for a job or for advancement in that job by undermining them. That would be stealing from them. If you're an employer in here and you're paying somebody an unjust wage, that's stealing from them. Now, understand, I don't mean to fall into the world where it says, well, everybody deserves to have a millionaire's wage. Not true. If you have not prepared yourself in life, you do not deserve a huge wage. If you've prepared yourself, if someone's got skills and they're really good for your company and you're paying them less than what they're worth, you're stealing from them. Sorry, if you're an employer in there, you might be calling Joe into the office tomorrow morning. Joe, listen, I'm going to up your salary. And Joe's going, why? Well, this talk last night. And just take the money, Joe. Take the money. That's fine. Give him my number and whatever. So anyway, also damaging somebody's property. You're not actually steal from them. You could just like key their car. You're stealing from them. You're not taking it yourself, but you're stealing from them. So that's not good. This commandment also, by the way, this commandment is linked to the church's teachings on economics, and specifically our responsibility to give charity to the poor. So it's in there. We don't just hand over money to some big charity. That's not prudent, that's not wise, that's not smart. We always give, this is Catholic teaching, we always give at the most local level possible. It's called the principle of subsidiarity. If you want to give food to the hungry, you can ship off a check to the UN Food Bank and you have no idea whether or not that's being used properly. You want to give food to the charity, right behind that door right there, the one that's open a little bit, it shouldn't be, it should be closed. That door right behind that, that's where that's where the Cathedral hands out food. Bring your canned corn, give it to them. And then you can walk through there and make sure they're doing it properly. And if they're not doing it properly, stop giving it to them, give it to somebody who's doing it properly. We have a responsibility to make sure that our charity is being used properly. It's not a matter of just writing a check and saying, I feel good about myself. Do it right. Otherwise, you're stealing twice. You're stealing from yourself because it's not doing any good, and you're stealing from the person that should have gotten it. So we have the responsibility to do due diligence and give to a good charity. Sorry, I'm on a soapbox. I got wound up. I apologize. I've just yelled at you guys. I'm so sorry. See people like doing this. Anyway, so that's 7 and 8. Now there's one left, and if you've noticed, I've sort of bounced around a little bit because I've combined some things. Anybody know which number I've left out? 8. Thank you. Okay, so 8 is you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Thou shalt not lie. And we got to reword that and say, be truthful. Simple. Be truthful. That's the green door version of the red door. You shall not bear false witness. Now, being truthful might have more aspects than you realize. First off, it means not telling lies, not perjuring yourself in court, not slandering somebody, but it's more. God gave us rational minds. We chew on facts. We make sense of the world by looking at things and doing that. And lies upset the natural order. It literally steals the ability for somebody to make sense of the world if they don't have access to truth. So they deserve access to truth so they can make sense of the world. And by the way, it's completely possible to totally deceive somebody and technically be telling the truth. Anybody know somebody like that? Seen any politicians like that? Where they can technically tell the truth, but they know they're deceiving you. Because they know what you want to hear. They say it this way, it's technically truth, but you've understood it in a way that's not actually true. The worst kind of snakes do that. We can also lie to ourselves. If we've ever tried to rationalize doing something that we know we shouldn't do, it always starts with a lie. We're lying to ourselves. Every intentional sin starts by us trying to deceive ourselves. Now, I'm old enough to remember when you could shake somebody's hand and that was as good as a contract. Daniel, I'll put you in a good sense now. Daniel, you and I want to go into business. And I know you well enough. I can shake your hand. We don't need a contract. I trust you. We can get rid of the cone now. I'm not trying to kill you anymore. I can shake your hand. That was a good time to live in. Some of you are old enough to remember that. It was a good time to live in. And there's no need for a contract. There's no need for a lawyer. It was a delightful time to live in. So truthfulness can affect everyone's quality of life in that sense. I'm also old enough to remember when all of science actually looked for truth. And that's not quite so at the moment. Sometimes now the outcome of scientific experiments are whoever is the highest bidder, whatever outcome needs to be there, and that's the losing truth. But I'm actually grateful for that. And those of you who know my story, because you've been listening to me for a while, by the way, the story of the transatlantic flight's coming up in 2 weeks. For those of you wondering when it's coming up, it's 2 weeks. I'm grateful for it because the folks that were attacking truth, I love math, science, and facts, and about 15 years ago, something inside me realized that subconsciously, that facts were disappearing from the world, and they weren't really reliable, and it led me somehow to realize that we may get to the point where the only thing left that has any truth is the Bible, and that realization came to somebody who didn't believe in God and who didn't believe in the Bible. But God was working anyway, saying, you know what? The last remnants of truth are right there, buddy. And that sort of pulled me towards faith. I'm grateful for the people, in a weird way. I'm grateful to the people that are trying to destroy truth in this world, because otherwise I probably never would have gotten to faith. So, in a strange twist, those people attacking the truth drove me to the arms of God, and I'm grateful for that. And today I hear about revivals on college campuses and stuff where, hundreds of people are being baptized in the weekend and stuff. People are hungry for truth. When truth is under attack, people flock to the most true thing there is, which is God and his church. Personally, I think that truth will reappear in our culture. I don't know exactly when, but I'm looking forward to it. And I hope I'm alive for it to really take hold. So, be truthful. Be someone whose word is their bond and whose handshake matters. In closing, there's a man by the name of Frank Sheed. I mentioned him last week. And I mentioned this analogy that I'm going to expand on a little bit. I mentioned it last week. I shortened it really quick. But he said, at the beginning of his book, A Map of Life, he says, if you want to know what something is, it's not enough to know what it's made out of. It's not even enough to know who made it. You need to know what its purpose is. You need to know what it was designed for. So he came up with this story to illustrate the point. He says, imagine a man's out looking for firewood and he stumbles upon a straight razor. For those of you who don't know, that's a straight razor. Okay? So, we're used to, double-edged blades and all that kind of stuff with safety blades. A straight razor is for somebody who doesn't fear death and they want to shave anyway. That's what they use. So this man stumbles across a straight razor while he's out looking for firewood, and he doesn't know what it is. He's never seen one before. But really quickly he recognizes it's good for cutting. So he starts cutting firewood with it. And really quickly he damages the blade. It's now not worth anything. He throws it away because it's not good for anything anymore. The point is that he used it without knowing what it's for. And the same is true for anything. We might mean well, but if we don't know what a thing is for, we can break it or make it dull. We need to know the purpose of a thing. And the best way to do that is to consult the maker of the thing. What is this made for? We can't properly use our life if we don't know what we're made for, what our purpose is. And the best way to know our purpose is to consult our maker. And God has revealed our purpose to us. To build up our virtue, to love God, to love neighbor, and to spend eternity in heaven. That's why we've been discussing the 10 Commandments. Knowing and expanding upon them in the direction of love helps you fulfill your purpose and keeps you from becoming dull. The goal is to grow in virtue, to love God, to love your neighbor, and to get to heaven. I hope you look at the 10 Commandments a little differently from this point forward. Thanks for listening. God bless you. God bless our country, and God bless the church all throughout the world.